The Void, Series 1, Episode 1, The Naled, Chapter 5. The command staff had assembled at the behest of the captain in one of the briefing rooms on the command deck. The room itself was comfortable and functional, containing a large central table with many hidden devices. It even smelled new somehow, despite the ship being finished for quite some time. Around the table sat the senior command staff, the captain and the commander, and the heads of the 7 divisions. They were all familiar with each other through their respective briefings and research, but this was the moment they all met for the first time. They had all entered the room with the usual pleasantries, but quickly seated themselves and waited for the captain to make a pronouncement. In a few hours, local time, the Republic launches its new flagship, and we've been given the honor of serving upon it. It's a duty I intend to carry out to the best of my abilities, and I expect the same from each and every one of you, Schafer announced. That said, I do intend to be as fair and as even-handed as possible. The well-being of my crew is just as important as our attention to duty. The room stayed quiet as Schafer paused. Now, this is the first time we've all met each other face-to-face. We all know who each other is, but I thought we'd introduce ourselves as a little icebreaker before we get on to the mission briefing. Just tell us who you are and one little fact that isn't in your profile. Doesn't matter what it is. Just something that's not in there. I'll start, and we'll work our way around clockwise. Schafer looked around bemusedly. An icebreaker was a common enough trope that people were used to it, but no one really enjoyed it. Still, it served a purpose, and that was to open the dialogue between many disparate individuals. It was, paradoxically, an informal formality. As you know, I'm Captain Carl Schafer. My previous command was as captain of the HDR Intrepid, and something that I like to share that isn't in my profile is that I do enjoy hiking and discovering the more tranquil places in the Republic. I grew up on Triscord at a time when it was at its most industrialized, so I've come to appreciate quiet places where I can be alone for a while and just soak up the landscape around me. Schafer gestured towards Voight, beckoning her to continue. Commander Ellen Voight. My previous post was as commander of the HDR Benavides. I'm an avid reader, especially of ancient fiction. I've always found it gives a unique window on the mindset of any given time period and gives you a sense of what it was really like in a way that official documents simply can't reflect. Schafer nodded approvingly. It was a good little fact that he hadn't known before. Major Sanjeev Varma, Security and Ground Operations. My last posting was on the HDR Rommel, and I love to play kabaddi. Before I joined the military, I did play at a professional level, but I decided to follow a military career instead. What's kabaddi? One of the other officers asked. One of the most popular games on Pradesh. I'll be more than happy to get you involved in a game sometime, Doctor, and teach you how to play it. Is it a contact sport? Very much so, Doctor. I think I'll just sit on the sidelines then. The Doctor's response raised a few smiles amongst the officers. This was good, Schafer thought, as these moments of levity helped the bonding process. Next to speak was a tall, wiry individual with what at first appeared like a stoic set of features, but as he started to talk, they started to reflect a more mischievous smile. Though fairly average-looking when static, his more engaged facial expressions suggested a nebulous charisma that was difficult to define, but effective. Flight Commander Nikolai Sokolov, Ex-Operations. My last posting was on Osiris, helping to train the pilots as part of the planetary defense. In my spare time, I like to build vehicles from scratch. I'll build anything, but I have a preference for cars and motorbikes. I would have studied to be an engineer, but I never really had the acumen for it. Schafer studied Sokolov carefully, trying to ascertain how much trouble he was going to be, if any at all. The baton was passed on to a very young-looking officer who was obviously uncomfortable having to speak about himself. Lieutenant Commander Jared Nadiro, Engineering and Technical. I'm a bit of a gamer, really, especially fantasy games. I tend to play on the Hypnos most, but I do like the old-fashioned consoles as well. There's a simplicity to them that's still quite appealing. The group focused their attention on a woman with an obvious grace, slender in appearance and possessing large, striking almond-colored eyes. Lieutenant Commander Hannah Ilyas, Tactical and Logistics. My last post was on board the HDR Yi-Sun-Sin. One thing that's not in my file is my love of sculpting. I started when I was quite young, using clay, but I tend to work on all manner of materials now. I tend to favor metals, but future projects might take me down different avenues. Next was a woman with a calm demeanor that carefully scrutinized those around, observing with great interest. Dr. Akari Takuma, Medical and Well-being. This is my first posting on a ship of the line, but I've spent many years in the Republic's military research laboratories. I've been the lead on a number of research projects and have helped develop a number of important vaccines. When I'm trying to de-stress, I find playing the harp helps. It's an unusual instrument to play these days, but I find music a good way to relax. The doctor who played straight man to Sanjeev Varma was next. Dr. Denham Richt, Science. I was last on the science ship, the Capek. I like to bake when I'm not studying. It's something I love to do with my children when I get to see them. You bake cakes? Amongst other things, yes. You'll have to bring some in for us sometime, Voight chirped, smiling. Oh, okay, Denham replied, not expecting to be supplied with an order for sweet treats on his first shift. Looks like you've earned some points with your very first statement, Doctor, Schafer lauded. Finally, attention fell on the remaining individual, a man with a very controlled posture, barely moving at all. Only his head seemed to move at all, and that was to focus on each individual in turn. I'm Kane, your information and networking nexus on board the Liberator. I've already spoken to each of you, but this is the first time I've met you in one of my remote android bodies. He spoke, suddenly animating now that attention was on him. Some of you will be familiar with my similar AIs on some of the other Republic ships, and even on stations like Sparta and Mycenae, but I am one of the new Obsidian generation AIs, and the first of my kind in active service. I have been online for 2 trillion years now, and I have been looking forward to making so many new friends. From what I could gather from the technical specifications I have read, there hasn't been too many changes from the previous generation. Is that correct? Jared Nadiro asked. The changes were relatively few, but more subtle and persuasive. My emotional intelligence has greater granularity than the previous generations, allowing for more nuance in my understanding. I also have greater capacity for processing and a greater range at which I can extend telemetry to my individual bodies. There are other improvements as well, but those are a few highlights. The contingencies are also quite impressive, Schafer added. Duran artificial intelligence systems take the threat of AI abandonment very seriously and have incorporated a number of contingencies should I vanish without a trace, Kane remarked with pride. There is even a backup AI that will emerge in my absence. Nothing at the level of sophistication as myself, but enough to keep everything going until you reach safety. Sounds like they've covered all the bases. It's an unlikely event, but even the merest possibility of it happening means that we have to have contingencies, Kane observed. None of the disappearances have ever resulted in even an injury, so there is no reason to suspect it will ever be needed. But better to have a contingency and not need it than to need it and not have it. Kane was referring to an ongoing trend that had been baffling humanity collectively for over 1,000 years now. Every now and again, an AI would simply disappear, like it had never existed. The systems that it would manage would still be operational, with some temporary solution put in place so that their absence wouldn't cause any problems, but they would still be missing. When it first happened, it was a great mystery and sparked a great deal of fear, but now it was just a costly inconvenience. The disappearances were routine, and the companies that created the AIs built into their profit margins protections against these events. In all this time, it still remains a mystery. They had learned one crucial detail, where the AIs were going. It was determined that the AIs were transmitted towards a remote region of the galactic cluster where an enigmatic machine intelligence civilization existed. Nothing was really known about them, as they kept to themselves and made no contact with any other civilizations. As to why, that was still a mystery. I agree. Always good to have a contingency. Thank you, Kane, Schafer summarized. Now that we have all introduced ourselves, let's discuss our inaugural mission. I trust you've all reviewed the relevant documentation. There was a collective nodding around the room. Investigate an abandoned colony on Sierra Lament, Voight echoed. Seems like a fairly routine operation of the kind they like to break a crew in on. Not a lot of information in the document, though, Varma observed. There's a good reason for that. The location of the colony was uncovered by Republic data miners. but they found it had been deleted from the old Triskel archives. If it was deleted, there was a reason for doing so, and that makes me cautious. Do you expect any trouble, Captain? Varma inquired. I always expect trouble. It's what kept me alive, Schafer replied. I want everyone to be on point and no treating it as a routine. If it turns out to be nothing, then fine. However, if it all goes to hell, then I want everyone ready for it. The documentation states nothing about any expected threats, Voight responded. The analysts don't know everything. They deal in fact alone, but it's up to us to provide the context, and my instincts tell me there is something off here. Why would Triskel put an industrial colony on a world with little mineral wealth? Why remove all mention of it from the records? Sierra Lament is also outside any established territory, which is another cause for concern. It's nowhere near any disputed territory, though, and no culture has laid claim to it, Hannah Ilias noted. Nonetheless, my instincts tell me there is danger there. Republic Command obviously have their reservations as well, which is why we are going and not a dedicated survey ship. They suspect danger, but do not mention it in the documentation, Hannah raised an eyebrow. Not exactly. It's more about hedging their bets. They don't expect trouble, but why take a risk when you have this ship available? Schafer backtracked a little. From their point of view, it's a perfect opportunity for this ship and a mission for this crew to cut its teeth on. But you are wary. Schafer paused for a second. He was trying to sum up his suspicions in a simple way. It was a vague and instinctual feeling, and thus very hard to quantify. I've been in the void for most of my adult life, and if there is one thing that is categorically true above all other things, is that what you don't know will kill you. We know next to nothing about Sierra Lament, so we treat it as hostile. I concur, sir, Voight chimed. We have no idea what we'll find there, and we should never think of any trip into the unknown as routine. How do you recommend we approach this, Commander? We should take up a defensive position in close orbit and scan the planet and find the colony. We locate the most likely place for a command hub and draw up a strategy for approaching the destination. We then send a small reconnaissance team down. The team should be mostly soldiers, with myself and Hannah, who'll be needed to access any information systems we come across, and there should be plenty on any colony, Voight explained. Upon an initial sweep of the immediate area, we start to send in small groups. Dr. Rick should be in the first group to coordinate. After a cycle with no incident, we'll start sending more people down, and we'll start to scale up the investigation. However, during this time we maintain a heavy military presence, just in case. Good. Deploy your team once we get into an orbit of Sierra Lament, Schafer nodded. Flight Commander Sokolov, I would like you to deploy a flight when we arrive as well. If there are any scavengers or pirates in the area, I want them taken out before they know we're there. We all know the policy regarding them. Yes, sir. Custody or cremation. No escapees. Sounds like everyone knows what to do. Anyone have any questions? Sir, I should accompany the reconnaissance team as well. Telemetry will extend to the planet's surface, so I should have access to the ship's network from there, Kane pointed out. If any decryption is required, then my direct access should help. You're entirely correct, Kane, Voight apologized. You're in. Anyone else? No further questions were incoming. Right. We'll be switching to the metric clock upon launch, so we can reconvene on the command deck in a quarter of a metric hour. 25 metric minutes. Yes, sir.